The lecture hall fell into a stunned silence the moment the elderly Harvard professor smiled confidently and declared that the impossible challenge on the board had defeated the brightest minds he had taught for more than 3 decades. Hundreds of students lowered their eyes, convinced they were about to witness another lesson in failure, until one quiet young woman sitting near the back slowly raised her hand. The room erupted with laughter before she had even spoken, and no one realized that the next 30 minutes would shatter lifelong prejudices, expose hidden truths, and change every heart inside that classroom forever. Before we begin this unforgettable journey, if you believe kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances can change lives, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to our channel to become part of our family and our community. Professor Alastair Mercer had earned a reputation that stretched far beyond the walls of Harvard. His lectures were legendary, his expectations were unforgiving, and his confidence often bordered on arrogance. Students admired his intelligence but feared becoming examples of failure in front of an audience. Every semester he presented one challenge that no class had ever solved. It was less about mathematics and more about courage, discipline, and the willingness to think beyond every accepted rule. The challenge had become part of university tradition, and countless brilliant students had walked away defeated. Among the hundreds filling the lecture hall that bright autumn morning sat a freshman named Brielle Carter. She rarely spoke in class, never tried to draw attention to herself, and spent most of her free hours working in the university library to help pay for tuition. Few classmates knew that she had grown up in a struggling neighborhood where opportunities were scarce, schools lacked resources, and success often seemed like a distant dream. Her mother cleaned office buildings during the day, while her grandmother had spent years teaching Brielle that knowledge belonged to anyone willing to fight for it. Every old textbook they found at garage sales became another treasure inside their tiny apartment. Brielle never believed intelligence belonged to prestigious families or expensive schools. She believed curiosity could survive anywhere, even inside homes where electricity was occasionally shut off because the bills could not be paid. While other children received expensive tutors, Brielle learned from worn-out library books with missing pages. When classmates mocked her dreams of attending Harvard, she quietly promised herself she would one day walk across its campus, not to prove them wrong but to honor every sacrifice her family had made. That promise had carried her into Professor Mercer's classroom, yet she quickly discovered that acceptance at Harvard did not erase invisible barriers. Some students assumed she had been admitted only because of scholarship programs. Others rarely partnered with her during projects. Small comments, dismissive glances, and whispered assumptions followed her everywhere. She learned to smile through them, believing that time would reveal her character better than arguments ever could. Professor Mercer drew an enormous collection of symbols across the board with calm precision before turning toward the audience. He explained that the problem had resisted every solution proposed by previous classes. It demanded not only technical skill but also the ability to abandon conventional thinking. Volunteers were invited to attempt it, yet nobody moved. One after another, students avoided eye contact, unwilling to become the next public disappointment. Brielle's heart pounded as she studied the board. Something about the arrangement reminded her of handwritten notes inside an old notebook her grandmother had rescued from a public library sale years earlier. The pages had contained unusual ways of approaching impossible-looking puzzles by simplifying assumptions instead of adding complexity. While everyone else stared at the equations individually, Brielle noticed a hidden relationship connecting them together. Her hand slowly rose. The laughter began almost immediately. Some students exchanged amused smiles. Others rolled their eyes. A few whispered that someone with her background could hardly succeed where generations of elite scholars had failed. The laughter was not loud enough to stop the lecture, but it was loud enough to reach Brielle's ears. Professor Mercer looked toward her with visible surprise. Although he never openly insulted students, years of confidence had convinced him that experience usually predicted outcomes. He simply nodded and invited her to approach. Each step toward the front of the room felt heavier than the last. Brielle could hear her own heartbeat louder than the whispers surrounding her. She remembered every person who had ever underestimated her, every teacher who had quietly suggested lowering her ambitions, every classmate who believed poverty defined intelligence. Instead of allowing those memories to weaken her, she carried them like invisible reminders of why she could not quit now. Standing before the board, Brielle did not immediately begin writing. She first erased several complicated expressions the professor had intentionally included to distract students. Gasps spread through the lecture hall as people wondered whether she had just destroyed the entire problem. Professor Mercer folded his arms. Brielle continued calmly. Rather than adding more calculations, she simplified them. Instead of following decades of accepted methods, she questioned assumptions everyone else had accepted without hesitation. Slowly the impossible maze transformed into a surprisingly elegant pattern. Students stopped whispering. Several leaned forward. Even Professor Mercer narrowed his eyes as he watched every line appear across the board. The final equation fit together with breathtaking simplicity. Silence swallowed the room. Professor Mercer walked closer, studying every symbol carefully. Minutes passed without a single word. He checked each calculation, retraced every logical step, and searched desperately for mistakes that never appeared. His expression gradually shifted from skepticism to confusion, then from confusion to genuine admiration. For the first time in many years, the professor smiled not with confidence but with humility. He quietly admitted that her reasoning was correct. The lecture hall exploded into applause. Many students who had laughed moments earlier now stood on their feet, unable to believe what they had witnessed. Yet Brielle's greatest victory was not solving the challenge. It was proving that brilliance often grows in places the world refuses to notice. News of the extraordinary classroom moment spread rapidly across campus before lunchtime. Professors discussed the solution during faculty meetings. Students shared handwritten copies of her work. Researchers visited the department hoping to understand the creative approach she had developed. As attention surrounded Brielle, she remained unchanged. She still worked afternoon shifts in the library. She still called her mother every day. She still visited the community center on weekends to tutor children who reminded her of herself. Professor Mercer found himself thinking constantly about the assumptions he had unknowingly carried throughout his career. Although he had always believed he judged students fairly, he realized that experience had quietly shaped expectations in ways he had never questioned. Watching Brielle solve the challenge forced him to confront a painful truth. Intelligence could never be measured by confidence, background, appearance, or reputation. Days later he invited Brielle to assist with one of his research projects. Many expected her to celebrate the invitation as the greatest achievement of her life, yet she accepted with quiet gratitude instead of excitement. She viewed the opportunity not as a personal victory but as another chance to keep learning. Working together transformed both teacher and student. Professor Mercer discovered fresh ways of thinking that years of routine had hidden from him. Brielle gained access to resources she had never imagined while also recognizing that even celebrated experts remained lifelong learners. Their partnership slowly inspired changes throughout the department. Professors reconsidered participation policies. Students became more willing to hear unfamiliar perspectives before making judgments. Group projects became less about choosing popular classmates and more about appreciating different ways of thinking. One afternoon the university organized a special event celebrating innovation. Faculty expected Brielle to present only the famous solution that had made headlines across campus. Instead, she spoke about something entirely different. She described her grandmother's tiny kitchen table where broken pencils were carefully sharpened because buying new ones was impossible. She remembered reading outdated textbooks while other children owned the newest editions. She thanked every librarian who had encouraged her curiosity, every neighbor who donated used books, and every difficult experience that taught resilience instead of bitterness. There was not a trace of anger in her words. Only gratitude. Many people in the audience wiped away tears. Professor Mercer listened quietly from the front row. He realized that Brielle's greatest gift was not extraordinary intelligence. It was extraordinary grace. She had every reason to resent those who doubted her, yet she chose forgiveness over resentment and compassion over pride. Near the conclusion of the event, Professor Mercer stood before the audience and offered something few expected from a man known for certainty. He admitted publicly that he had learned one of the greatest lessons of his career from a first-year student. He encouraged everyone to examine the silent assumptions they carried every day because hidden prejudice often disguised itself as experience or logic. He reminded students that the next groundbreaking idea might come from the quietest person in the room. The standing ovation that followed belonged not only to Brielle but to every person who had ever been underestimated. Years later, graduates still remembered that bright afternoon as the day an impossible equation became far less important than an unforgettable lesson about humanity. New students heard the story during orientation, not because of mathematical brilliance but because it reminded everyone that greatness can appear where the world least expects it. The famous challenge remained part of Professor Mercer's course, but one sentence was permanently added beneath it on the board. Never assume you already know who is capable of changing everything. Before we reach the end of this story, take a moment to leave a meaningful comment sharing a time when someone believed in you, or when you chose to believe in someone others overlooked. Your story may inspire another person who needs hope today. Professor Mercer retired years later carrying many awards, yet he often told friends that the most valuable lesson of his life had never come from a conference, a prestigious journal, or a celebrated colleague. It came from a quiet young woman who refused to let other people's expectations define her future. Brielle continued dedicating her life to education, creating scholarship programs for children from underserved communities so that countless young dreamers would never feel limited by where they started. Every student she encouraged became another reminder that compassion can open doors talent alone cannot. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Remember that kindness costs nothing, forgiveness frees the heart, hope changes lives, and sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the very one destined to change everything.